So guys, I'm assuming you have installed both the routing entries in the interface file on router VM as well as router VM2. So now, and also you have to reboot the router after making the changes. So now let us try to test whether our L3 routing entries are working or not. So the first thing you can check is to check the routing table, that is the L3 routing table on router VM, and check whether the table is showing the entry to the remote subnet 192.168.1.0/24. So here you can see that I am on router VM, and if you trigger the command route -n, it will show you the L3 routing table. So you can see that the router VM shows the entry for the subnet 192.168.1.0/24. So this is the entry of our interest. So you can see that the router VM can reach the remote subnet 192.168.1.0/24. Here the mask 24 value is represented in A.B.C.D format. So the destination is 192.168.1.0/24. That is the destination column and gen mask combined together to form a destination, right? And the gateway IP address is 192.168.4.1, which is the next hop IP address, and the outgoing local interface is Ethernet 2. So this is the L3 routing table entry which tells the router VM to how to reach an IP address which falls in this remote subnet, right? Similarly, on router VM2 you can check the L3 routing table entry, and on the router VM2 it shows how to reach a remote subnet 192.168.4.0. That is, router VM2 can reach a remote subnet 192.168.4.0/24. So here is the entry of our interest, right? So it means that the L3 routes that we have installed have been successfully picked up by our routers. Now let's check the reachability of remote subnets. So I'm on router VM, and let me try to ping an IP address which lies in the remote subnet. Let me ping 192.168.1.2. So I am pinging the local IP address of router VM2 from router VM. So at this point of time I am on router VM and I am pinging 192.168.1.2, and you can see I am receiving ICMP replies. It means that my router is reachable to 192.168.1.2. Similarly, go to VM2, and from VM2 try to ping the IP address 192.168.4.2, and you can see that if you are receiving the reply, it means that the IP address 192.168.4.2 is reachable from the router VM2, right? And of course you can use route -n command to verify whether the route has been correctly installed in the routing table or not. So it means we have fully established the topology. We have learned how to create a topology, how to insert links in the topology, how to configure the IP addresses, and how to configure the L3 routing table. So our topology is fully functional and operational now. So I have pasted the output of route -n command, which I have triggered on virtual machine VM. And the entry of interest, you can see that 192.168.1.0/24 is the remote subnet that is reachable from our router VM via outgoing interface Ethernet 2. And the next hop IP address is 192.168.4.1, right? And to check the Arp table, you can run the command arp -n. The Arp table shows only the neighbor information, that is the neighbor IP address and the neighbor's MAC address and the local outgoing interface through which the neighbor is reachable. So you can see in the second entry of the Arp table, the neighbor IP address is 192.168.4.1, right? And the MAC address of interface Ethernet 2 of virtual machine VM1 is the following. You can verify it by using ifconfig command on virtual machine VM1. And the local outgoing interface of virtual machine VM through which the neighbor VM1 is reachable is Ethernet 2. That is this interface. So what does the entry in the Arp table mean? That we will going to study in detail when we will be learning L2 routing. Right? So let us quickly summarize what we have learned in this module 2. In this module, we had a quick tour on how to set up multi-node environment on a single machine using VirtualBox. And we learned assigning IP addresses and configuring static routes. See, the routes that you have been configuring in your virtual machine are static routes. Why they are static? Because they are being configured by the administrator manually, right? So such routes are called static routes. And we were able to ping machines which are more than one hop away. For example, we were able to ping VM2 from VM and we were able to ping VM from VM2. Also, we noticed the routing table and Arp table entries. We learned the criteria for identifying local and remote subnets relative to a given machine. So this was just a quick tour to make you familiar with networking. I'm sure you may have a lot of unclarity at this point of time, such as what should be the IP address of local interface and other end interface of the link. See, you cannot just assign any random IP address. You have to follow certain schemes that we will going to discuss in the next module. And what is Subnet Mask? How this works? And why we always been using the Subnet Mask value /24, why we are not using /28 or /20 and so on, right? So we will going to study in detail the functionality of Subnet Mask. And why not configure routes for local subnets and configure routes for remote subnets, right? So all these questions we will going to elaborate when we will be learning L2 routing and L3 routing in their separate modules. And what are the semantics of the routing table entry? I think we have discussed it pretty well, that the routing table entry contains the destination subnet, and to reach that subnet, what is the outgoing interface and what is the next hop IP address. So that is all about routing table entry. And of course, what does Arp table do? That we will going to actually Arp table help us to do L2 routing. So we will going to study in detail how does Arp table is populated and how Arp table help us to do L2 routing. So that we will going to study in the module number 3 and so on. So I hope you have now started enjoying networking. So let's meet in the next module, guys. So that's all in this module.